Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
When you're being respectful to events that actually happened in a film, things can get a little intense, and when you're within the sound of my voice, that must mean you are in the seats with once more. As always, my name is Dave Voigt, and I'm the host of this podcast where we sit down with a wide-ranging variety of industry professionals and we pick their brain about current projects, state of the industry, how they got started, and so very much more in a light and conversational fashion. And if you like how we do things around here, I'm going to go on a limb and assume that you do because you're listening right now. You can subscribe to the podcast. Hit that old subscribe button. Give us the like. Give us a 5-star rating. Wherever you get your podcasts. We're at Apple, Amazon, Spotify, Google. Basically, it's all good. You can find us pretty much everywhere. And plus, we archive every single one of our episodes over at our In the Seats YouTube channel. So if you can give us a like and subscribe there as well, we would absolutely appreciate it. Also, don't hesitate to check us out on social media. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, and we're on Instagram at In the Seats for all sorts of fun updates. And finally, and I say it a lot, but it is the most important, please pay us a visit over at In the Seats, intheseats.ca, for all the latest and greatest from the world of film, television, basically the moving image at large. If we love to watch it and write about it and talk about it, we love it when you come by and read about it and listen about it. So please pay us a visit. On this episode, we've got a supremely interesting one. It's on video on demand now after a short theatrical run. The film is called Nitram, and it's based on a true story. And it is the story of Nitram, who's played supremely well by Landry Jones. He's an isolated and he's a frustrated young man who lives with his parents in suburban Australia in the mid-90s, but until he unexpectedly finds a close friend in a reclusive heiress. But that relationship meets a tragic end, and this young man becomes very lonely and very angry, and it begins a slow descent into disaster. And it is based on a real-life mass shooting that did happen in Australia, which caused massive sweeping reform to their gun laws. And it's a vital film to watch because, I mean, as we see on our news on a daily basis, these mass shootings happen quite a lot, and there's a lot of angry people out there, which is an unfortunate thing. But we had the unique pleasure of sitting down with director Justin Kurzel to talk about why he wanted to tell this story and everything around it, and just sort of casting and finding the right people and just cinema in general. He's an interesting guy and a really fascinating filmmaker, but I cannot recommend Nitram enough. You check it out on all your favorite video on demand platforms. But first, enjoy our talk with Justin, because between you and me, it's a pretty good one. Well, Justin, I mean, first off, just thank you so much for the time today. I really appreciate this.
No, it's a pleasure. No problem.
Now, I mean, obviously, I just finished the film, and I mean, you did a great job, man. I mean, I was really struck by it because, I mean, in a story like this, it very much felt like you were taking real, very specific care of the characters and the players involved and trying to be as respectful as possible to the story. I guess my first question for you is, walk me through sort of the origins on your end of wanting to tell this story.
Well, it was a script that was given to me by Sean Grant, who I'd made 2 other films with. Actually, Sean wrote the first film that I made, Snowtown. And it really just arrived out of the blue. He wrote it as a spec script, and he kind of rang up and he said, "There's something in your inbox. Have a look." And I live in Tasmania at the moment, and I knew what it was from the first page. So I kind of started reading with enormous trepidation. But as I sort of started reading, I saw that it was sort of something different. It wasn't what I thought it was going to be, and that it was a really insightful look at not only gun reform but also family and mental illness and I guess how we look after each other. That that really compelled me, and I guess there was sort of something familiar and recognizable about it. I just sort of felt as though Sean was writing that street that I lived on, that family that I kind of knew, that person that I crossed the road to the other side to not pass, there just sort of seemed to be sort of something there, that a DNA in it that felt really familiar and recognizable. So I debated it, but at the end of the day, it was I trusted Sean, and it was such an extraordinary script that I just felt as though I had to be involved and had to make it.
For sure, no, absolutely. And I mean, something about the film that really at least hit home for me, and I mean, I think this is something that has been sort of a tangent, at least through some of your films. When we see a story like this, it feels like the storyteller always has a sort of tendency to sort of push in and focus and zoom in, like, and get very close to the character. But when I watch your films, and specifically this film, there are certain moments where you're not afraid to sort of sit in the long shot and sit in sort of a wider shot. Like, and to me as an audience member, I think that hits home a lot more. What is it about for you trying different sort of visual things and framing them in a specific way to sort of really let the emotion that you want in the scene to hit? Because at least for me, it doesn't seem like it plays in a non-traditional way, but it plays so effectively.
Yeah. Look, I think that I definitely approached this in a similar style to the way I made my first film. And in terms of budget and in terms of number of crew, they were both quite similar films, and we shot them very quickly. So there was something quite liberating about returning to a place where you had to work fast and you had to work in a very precise and simple way. And look, I knew as soon as I read it that what I liked about the way in which Sean had written it was the restraint, not only the restraint in not showing the violence and brutality that is connected to the event, but more sort of focus on the lead up to it. But it was also, there seemed to be a restraint in something being very watching and observational about the family and about the lead character. And I sort of had many conversations with the DOP about not wanting to feel the camera so much, and I guess me as a director being more invisible. And because as soon as you kind of did something or put the camera too close, or even in post when you started to either experiment with music or whatever, it became scarily forced. That you could suddenly feel me trying to lead an audience through it, as opposed to just allowing us to kind of watch with some distance. So that was really different, and something I really enjoyed, just in terms of a filmmaker, just really allowing myself to disappear and really sort of trust, I guess, what was on the page, but also where we're shooting and the performances that were there. I mean, it's interesting because after a while, it was like shooting. I mean, we used a lot of long lenses, so it was kind of like shooting, like those wildlife documentaries where you're sort of shooting the subject from afar, and there was a similar kind of feel. And we definitely shot a lot of Nitram through the perspective of those other characters, the mother, the father, and Helen. That there was something, I guess, his danger too was, really came through in the way the other characters were watching him. And the camera, I guess, sort of became that third watchful eye in a way.
Now, does that distance help the actors with sort of building character wars and doing the work on this? Because, I mean, obviously you're recapping in many ways a story that did actually happen, but you're not necessarily telling the story of the people who were involved, and it's more of just an idea of how it feels like distinctively a little bit more abstract, as opposed to the actor trying to sort of tell the story of the actual person, but rather the idea of this character. Like, how do you bring in the actors to something like this, where again it's based on something that happened, but it's not necessarily verbatim or sort of researched or inspired by, that kind of thing?
I think you got to, I mean, look, I think what I find really helpful, and when a film is sort of working well, is when there's an authenticity around it. That you're choosing locations and places that have their own kind of truth and honesty, and you can kind of embed an actor in a world or a location or a set that they feel is true to them, and then the camera can get back and it can just sort of watch and observe, because you're kind of not dressing and you're kind of not framing for a camera angle. You're actually creating a whole environment that exists, and there's a sort of truth to it and authenticity to it that you've worked really hard to kind of get, and it makes filming it a lot more liberating, because it is almost like a 360 authentic world, so you can kind of shoot wherever you kind of want, and I really enjoy that and I really love trying to find an authenticity in a film, and it's where I think I'm on more solid ground.
I love Caleb's performance in this. Was he sort of the top of the wish list for you in sort of reading this? Because I mean, just the dynamic that he brings to the screen, but not only by himself, but sort of his interactions with Judy and then with Anthony, like everyone really did sort of seem very in tune with the material.
Yeah, I think so. I think he was one of the first that we thought about. We're kind of going, okay, well, who do you imagine in this role? After I sort of read the script, and I think both Sean and I went, it would be someone like Caleb Landry Jones, and we knew his work, and there's a physicality to him that we thought was really interesting. And then we kind of went, well, why can't it be Caleb Landry Jones? And we went and we met him in Los Angeles, and he'd read the script and fortunately responded to it and had some pretty amazing things to sort of say about it and the character. And then for us, probably the only hurdle was, him being Texan, whether he could do the Australian accent, and, because actors that sort of come here and do an Australian accent badly get pretty savaged. So we're kind of going, this is just not the film that you want an actor to be savaged about their accent. So we were nervous about that, but also felt confident that, Caleb was in it enough to really work hard at that. And we had an amazing voice coach as well, Jen Kent, who, helped him enormously as well. But I think so. From the start, I think he was sort of someone that we instantly imagined, and it doesn't happen too often. Like usually, it's just a blank face that you kind of have in your head when you're sort of reading a script for the first time. But with this one, it was interesting. Both Sean and I kind of both almost simultaneously sort of said Caleb.
That's awesome. Now, I mean, just in the root and the meat of this story is really very universal, because I mean, obviously there are gun reform issues that are going on all over the world. And I mean, I'm kind of curious, because people tend to think of, social problems in sort of regions, and they do that with filmmaking as well. I'm kind of curious, from your perspective, how do you think this story plays on a more universal level? Because I mean, when I watched it, it felt very focused so much. I think, like you said at the beginning, like this is really a story about family and sort of interactions with one another, and how sort of mental health issues can get sort of lost by the wayside and turn into something sort of tragic like this event was.
Look, I think when we first started it and we're thinking of it as a film, I think we definitely were making it for an Australian audience, just because it was such a seismic event here, and it's so loaded, and there's such a strong context to that event, and it's still an event that's quite taboo in regards to sort of talking about it and having a discussion about it. So when you're making the film and you're sort of thinking of an Australian audience watching it, every scene is sort of layered with what everyone knows is going to happen at the end, and I guess just the history of 25 years of reflection and memory and grief about what happened. But when it played in Cannes, where audiences weren't aware of so much as to the sort of context of it, I noticed that it played like a family drama. That it very much felt like something that people recognized, and And that was sort of something that I think evolved as we were sort of shooting. I think what Judy Davis brought to that mother role was really nuanced and sort of centered the film much more towards what is it to be a parent and what is it to parent someone, a child like this who grows up as a man like this. How does that affect the relationship that you have with your husband and your partner? So I think there were definitely things that started to play differently overseas. And look, in America, it's a very different conversation. We were shooting in November 2020, and I remember distinctly walking on set, and the number of mass shootings in America had just ticked over 480 just for the year. So it's a really different conversation, as opposed to Australians' relationship with gun culture completely shifted and changed forever after that event. So I could really understand and see how the film played differently for different audiences, but at the same time, probably at what's there and that's common for everyone is definitely that kind of that family drama that plays so sort of strongly in the first half of the film.
For sure. Now, I mean, this is something I'm curious about, because I've got to say, I mean, at least from sort of the perspective of a viewer looking at sort of not just the films that you've done, but even like Australian film as a whole in the industry, like I'm kind of curious, how has the business sort of shifted, just given the way, like the demand there is for content sort of on a global scale? Because I mean, I look at the stuff that, I mean, not just the stuff that you've done and the successes you've had with stuff like Macbeth, but I mean, also like the work that your wife has done. And I mean, some of the work that so many other people have done. How has sort of the Australian film business shifted into, I guess, more of a global market? Because I mean, I really find as a Canadian, because I'm up here in Toronto, we're getting similar shifts up here, as like films aren't necessarily labeled as Australian or Canadian anymore. They're just labeled as films, as opposed to sort of being, like the regionality of any kind of sort of cinema is starting to sort of fade away a little bit.
Yeah, look, I think there's a lot of TV happening. And I think in some sense it's diminishing film, and it's diminishing auteurs, and it's diminishing certain voices. And, I find I think there's really great, good TV, as there always has been, but there's a lot
for sure
that feels quite homogenized. And I think that it's in some sense, I think there is real, in Australia there's a particular streamer here, and that really does focus a lot on Australian films, has bought a lot of Australian films, and and does a lot of Australian television. And I think that there is a genuine sort of need to make those sort of films or content for Australians, about Australian stories. But I think it's diminishing. I don't see many independent art house films around, and I think they're getting harder to make. Really, really tough to make. I've got a few friends at the moment, Australian friends, who are really, who should have had their films up, 2 years ago, and are really struggling. And they're ready and prime, and they're at their absolute peak, and and it's a real struggle. So I'm not sure how healthy it is. I think there's a really strong focus on TV at the moment, and I do worry about where the next sort of auteurs are coming from, where the next filmmakers are coming from. I think they'll always be there, but it's it is, I think, becoming harder to make those more interesting films.
Well, I mean, it speaks to just how much we share stories as well, because I mean, well, something like Kelly Gang is obviously very much an Australian story. It's also a badass Western, and sort of at the same time, and it has sort of those vibes and sort of those sort of motifs. I mean, while I do agree with you, there's definitely sort of a struggle for auteurs. I kind of love the fact that we're not sort of bound by any sort of geographical limitations or like sort of regional or sort of nationalistic limitations, and sort of, you know, there can be great action movies coming out of Canada. There can be great, you know, Westerns coming out of Australia. Like there isn't necessarily that sort of, I mean, I guess the right word I'm looking for is sort of.
Well, I think that's streaming.
Yeah.
You know, I think that there's a cross-pollination of stuff, because it's easier to see some of these films because they're streaming. You can watch them at home and you can kind of, you know. But yeah, I got to say, you know, when I did my first film, Snowtown, the number of cinemas that it was in was a lot.
Yeah.
But now, you know, because there's obviously this sort of cross-pollination and marriage between streaming and theatrical now, it's just different. But I do agree with you. I do think that, you know, if there's a film that you want to see and it's a film from a different region, that you will find it. And you know, you don't have to wait for a theatrical release or, you know, travel to that one cinema that's playing it. You I think you do have more access, you know, in a way, and that is different. But I do miss going to the cinema. I do miss watching these films in the cinema.
For sure.
It's a different world now, isn't it? I mean, after the last 2 years and us getting used to watching films on screen, you know, in our homes, it's just a very different kind of feeling at the moment.
But at the same time, it doesn't also feel like if you had made this movie 10, 15 years ago, you would have been able to get an American actor like Caleb to come work on a film like this. And I mean, I think that's really at the end of the day a beautiful thing. I mean, and just to put a bow on this, and this is something I've always got.
I think you're right about that.
What?
I think you're right about that.
Yeah.
I think it would have been much harder.
And like, this is something I like to ask, you know, a filmmaker like you, because I mean, I remember being blown away when I watched Macbeth, and just sort of the originality of it and sort of the starkness of it. And I've got to ask, for you as a storyteller, like what were the stories in your younger days that sort of drew you in and made you want to sort of be a storyteller and try to give audiences, no matter what size screen they watch it on, a very unique experience, which I think you've managed to do not only with Nitram, but I mean with so many of your films.
Is this just in terms of films?
In general, yeah.
Well, I remember, I mean, I was telling my kids the other day, I felt so old, but I remember going to the video store, and I remember it being just the most amazing, magical place where you'd spend an hour just choosing a film and looking at the covers and, you know, getting in a conversation with someone, or, you know, having some sort of geeky conversation with the guy behind the counter that you got to know over 3 years. And I had a place up the road from where I lived. It was a car yard that they turned into a video store. So it was this massive indoor, almost massive garage that they then converted into a video store. So there were thousands of videos. Like, it took you ages to walk around it all. It wasn't a small boxy video store. And, you know, you got 10 movies for whatever. And usually I could only afford the weeklies. And I think that's where it sort of blew my mind, where, you know, I was lucky. I had some really cool people that worked at the store that said, you should watch this and you should watch that. And I remember those sort of moments of, you know, sort of being 14, 15 and suddenly discovering Stanley Kubrick and having that first Scorsese Raging Bull moment, or Taxi Driver. And then, you know, seeing Jane Campion's first film, and, you know, watching Delicatessen, and, you know, you know, and then all those others sort of, you know, like I remember the first two films that I watched were on video were Victory, the Sylvester Stallone film, and Beastmaster.
Oh, that's a heady mix right there.
yeah. And, you know, I remember getting the thing, putting it in the video, and you watched it, and then you had to rewind it at the end, and it was just, there was something so tactile about it all. And so I fell in love with, you know, I was growing up in the country. It was 42 degrees outside. It was screaming hot. You know, you're looking to escape, and video store was my escape. And then I just think I don't know, just like getting into music, you have an older brother, or you have a younger brother, or you've got a friend who is just gets you onto stuff, and it really just grew, and it was a pure and utter love. So I was just very lucky. I got to see some stuff, some really good stuff early on, and it did shape me, and it did start to, and it was interesting because the Kubrick stuff and the, you know, I'd see the Werner Herzog stuff, and I didn't quite know who these directors were, but I didn't quite understand the films at the time, but I knew they were important, and I knew, and I knew, and there was something in them that I kept on thinking about. So I could feel good cinema even at a young age, in terms of, I knew that even though I didn't totally understand it, I knew that there was something there that was going to awaken me, and, you know, and it was going to be a film I was going to see another 20 times down the track, you know.
Right.
So I think that was it. I think it really came from video.
Well, I love that, man. And I miss those video store days, to be sure. But I definitely think one day someone will show someone one of your films, and that may definitely spark someone down a different path. Because, I mean, I think you've made a hell of a film here, and I can't wait for more people to see it. And I just keep doing the good work, man. And thank you so much for the time today.
No, thanks so much.
All right. Cheers, Justin.
And don't forget to visit our friends over at Bay Street Video for all your DVD, Blu-ray rental, or purchasing needs this summer, as they are still open for curbside and some mailing delivery as well. Over at 1172 Bay Street, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, you can give them a call at 416-964-9088. That's 416-964-9088. Or send them an email at baystreetvideoto@gmail.com for any of your DVD and Blu-ray needs.